Hello, my AP students. This is Wendy with AP History Help, and this is the AP History Help podcast. It is Season 2, Episode 2, and I will give you a little preview of what to expect from this season, which happens to follow the school year. But in general, you will learn everything you need to know about taking AP History classes, from skills to content, from historical thinking skills to themes in history. Whether you are taking or thinking about taking AP World History, AP US History, or AP European History, this podcast is for you. Be sure to check out the episode list and show notes to find the topics that you need help with. AP History Help is on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, where I am happy to answer your questions. Before I start, I'm going to talk briefly about what to expect from Season 2. Students, you might remember that Season 1 was focused on the skills, the themes, and the strategies for success in your AP History classes. Please, if you are new to our class and or to AP History, please look back through those episodes for further information on that side of the courses. Looking ahead, Season 2 will be predominantly content focused. And since I want to cover as much content as possible over the course of the school year and prior to your exams, I'm going to alternate between AP World and APUSH content. And AP Euro students, unfortunately, that content will come in Season 3 of the podcast. But if you need my help, just send me a message on social media or text or call or email me to ask any questions or even set up some tutoring sessions. I also have a self-paced AP Euro class available, and I'll put the link to that in my show notes. Because the episodes this season are content-based, I would strongly recommend taking notes. There are a lot of ways to do this, but my recommendation is to do so thematically. In US history, there are 8 themes, which I'll put in the show notes. But just like world history, I want you to focus especially on social, political, economic, cultural, and technological events and trends. Your best bet would be to have a copy of my Student Success Planner available through Amazon or from me by mail. I'll drop the link in my show notes to my website, which gives you the option to buy it either way. Oh, or you could go to my TikTok shop and buy it there. Find me at AP History Help. But at the very least, listen to these podcast episodes with a pen and a pencil and a piece of paper. Come in, students. Let's get this episode of AP History Help started. First, get your notes out. We've got a lot of thematic focus as well as some comparison and causation. Our topic for today is Unit 1 of AP US History. The time period is 1491 to 1607. APUSH doesn't have pretty titles for each of their units or time periods, but that's okay. Understanding the time period means knowing why those dates are significant. Why does our first time period begin in 1491 and end in 1607? This is what we call periodization. Each of these time periods of APUSH have a pretty clear beginning and end, which we'll talk about shortly. Developing a good understanding of what events define a period is helpful, as it helps you to sharpen those reasoning processes, compare and contrast, causation, and it allows you to categorize and look at changes in continuities. In other words, integrate all of those historical thinking skills. Got it? Good. Okay, kids. What happened in 1491 that starts this time period? 1491 was the last year that the indigenous people were unaffected by Europeans, namely Christopher Columbus. His arrival marks a turning point in both world and American history, as it initiated lasting contact between the people of Europe, America, and Africa. This is our context. Period 1 focuses on what life was like in the Americas before European contact and how contact with the Europeans forever altered their lives, cultures, and customs of the American Indian societies, the Native American societies prior to European contact. Now, this unit represents just 5% of the recommended content for the course, and you won't see it on a DBQ. Our two big ideas are that first, we see Native populations migrate and settle across the expanse of North America over time. And they develop distinct and increasing complex societies by adapting and transforming their diverse environments. Second, contact among Europeans, Native Americans, and Africans resulted in the Columbian Exchange and significant cultural, social, and political changes on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Let's take a look at some details. Before European contact, American Indian tribes across both North and South America had complex societies with distinctive social structures, political organizations, and religious beliefs. Along the American Northwest, American Indians had a combination of permanent settlements and hunter-gatherer lifestyles. In the Great Plains, tribes followed the herds of buffalo and lived a nomadic lifestyle. In the American Southwest and modern-day Mexico, the American Indians cultivated maize or corn. Maize was a staple crop that allowed tribes to develop a more sedentary or settled lifestyle. Native American religion was often connected to their relationship with nature, what we call animism, a belief that non-human things like plants or animals possessed a spiritual essence. They developed these different and complex societies that both adapted and transformed to their environments. This includes the Pueblo of the Southwest, the Lakota Sioux of the Great Basin and Great Plains, and the Iroquois of the Northeast. The Pueblo lived in arid land and relied on irrigation to grow maize and other agricultural products. The Lakota Sioux lacked natural resources, and that led to the growth of a nomadic lifestyle and the importance of hunting buffalo or bison. And the Iroquois were a mix of agricultural and hunter-gatherer societies. They established permanent villages and formed the Iroquois Confederation. This was a democratic way of organizing their tribes and would later be an inspiration for the founding fathers in trying to establish a permanent form of government. Then along comes Columbus, who was funded by the King and Queen of Spain. Meanwhile, exploration was en vogue in Europe. The Portuguese opened up trade routes to Africa and India and would make claims, along with the Spanish, to territories in the Americas. The Pope stepped in to settle this conflict between the two Catholic monarchies, and Spain definitely got more in the Western Hemisphere, essentially leaving Portugal with just modern-day Brazil. Meanwhile, the British explored modern-day Newfoundland in 1497, waiting many more decades, almost a century, before challenging Spanish claims. And France first showed interest in exploration in 1524. Both the English and the French were slow to develop colonies along the Atlantic, but that would change looking ahead to the 1600s. What was the motivation, or to use historical reasoning terminology, causation, for all of this exploration, treaties, and claims to land? We call it the 3 Gs: God, gold, and glory. Spread the word of God, namely Christianity. Get rich from all the resources, whether it be gold or other things, and bring glory to your name. Not everyone appreciated this, or, well, most indigenous people were subjugated, enslaved, or even killed, whether it was directly or indirectly through disease. One example of fighting back came from the Pueblo in 1680. I know technically that is Unit 2, but it fits into context here. The Spanish attempts to change the Native Americans' belief led to resistance and conflict. In what became known as the Pope's Rebellion, the Pueblo killed hundreds of Spanish colonists and destroyed Catholic churches in the area. Tune into episode 4 to see what happens next. The Columbian Exchange is very important. Enter more causation, what caused it, and what were the effects. The Columbian Exchange brought new crops to Europe from the Americas, stimulating European population growth and new sources of mineral wealth, which facilitated the European shift from feudalism to capitalism. Improvements in maritime technology and more organized methods for conducting international trade, such as joint stock companies, helped drive changes to economies in Europe and the Americas. Spanish exploration and conquest of the Americas were accompanied and furthered by widespread deadly epidemics that devastated native populations and by the introduction of crops and animals not found in the Americas. To continue, the Columbian Exchange is not a trade route. It is the exchange, the trade of products, people, diseases, technology, ideas between the Americas and Europe and Africa. Some examples include tomatoes and corn and potatoes from the Americas to Europe, which, by the way, was great for the European diet. These crops led to more food. More food led to longer life expectancy. Longer life expectancy led to population growth. Going in the other direction, horses, bananas, honeybees, cows, and lots of diseases like smallpox made their way from Europe to the Americas, and slaves were transported from Africa to the Americas. Who got the better deal there, do you think? In Unit 2 of APUSH, we really dive into comparing the different regions of colonies. But here in Unit 1, remember, it's before 1607, before those first settlements. Colonization is really about the motives for doing so. The Spanish, as sponsors of Columbus, they were first, but their claims were largely present-day Florida, Texas, Arizona, California, southward. Soon, Protestant England, which was starting to compete overseas for superiority, were ramping up to challenge Spain. Unlike the English and Spanish and French and Dutch, they would try to exploit the resources of this quote-unquote new world. As a result, these traders would form more complex relationships with indigenous people. Spain and Portugal formed colonies that used Native American and African slave labor in agriculture and mining. And France, the Dutch, and Spain would not only trade, but intermarry with the natives. Ultimately, it boils down to these European countries wanting to get rich through access to raw materials and acquiring as much gold and silver as they could get their hands on, a little idea we call mercantilism. The colony exists literally to enrich the mother country. In conclusion, contact among Europeans, Native Americans, and Africans resulted in the Columbian Exchange and significant social, cultural, and political changes on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. European expansion into the Western Hemisphere generated intense social, religious, political, and economic competition and changes within the European societies. The Columbian Exchange and development of the Spanish Empire in the Western Hemisphere resulted in extensive demographic, economic, and social changes. In their interactions, Europeans and Native Americans asserted divergent worldviews regarding issues such as religion, gender roles, family, land use, and power. And that brings us to 1607. The end of the time period, and the establishment of the first permanent settlement in the British colonies, Jamestown, which is where we begin Unit 2. Reviewing the content you're learning, be sure to focus on the themes of the unit. The Native American traditions, as well as European religious beliefs, both point to culture. The establishment of colonies and claiming territory, that's political. The trading posts, and especially the Columbian Exchange, are both economic themes in this period. When you cover a lesson, or at the very least a unit, go through those themes and ask yourself, what was social, political, cultural, economic, technological? There are other themes for APUSH, but if you can focus on those 4 or 5, you'll be in great shape. Now, before class ends today, let me talk about how you might have to show what you know from Unit 1. This time period, as I said before, represents only 4 to 6% of the test. That would be like one set of multiple choice questions, but it's entirely possible that it could be one short answer question, or SAQ. And if that is the case, I would bet that it would be on the Columbian Exchange. Something like this. A, explain one impact of the Columbian Exchange on the Americas. B, explain one impact of the Columbian Exchange on Europe. And C, explain one way Native people sought to defend their sovereignty against one of the changes brought about by European colonization. I want you to pause this video or this podcast and give it some thought as to how you might answer that question. Then come back here to talk about it. First, one impact of the Columbian Exchange on the Americas was the introduction of diseases like smallpox to the Native American people. This decimated their population, helping Europeans to conquer and colonize. Next, one impact of the Columbian Exchange on Europe was the introduction of new high-yield crops to Europe like corn, potatoes, and tomatoes. This led to increased food supplies and, as a result, a growing population. Last, one way Native people sought to defend their sovereignty against the changes brought about by European colonization was the Pueblo Revolt. This is when the Pueblo were upset over the Spanish attempts to change their beliefs and would lead to the death of hundreds of Spanish colonists, as the Pueblo revolted by destroying churches. Let me know if you have any questions about that SAQ. And yes, there is more than one right way to answer it. Next episode, which will be released in 2 weeks on September 9th, will be for Unit 2 of AP World History, Networks of Exchange. But just 2 weeks after that, on September 23rd, you will be ready for Unit 2, which moves on to the next time period, 1607 to 1754. In the meantime, review and practice the content. If you haven't already done so, get that Student Success Planner from my website, from Amazon, or from the TikTok shop. Head over to my website, aphistoryhelp.com, where you'll see a bunch of ways to contact me. And feel free to do so with any questions you might have. I am here to help you. And that will do it for this episode of the AP History Help podcast. Don't forget to come back to Wendy for AP History Help. And this episode of the AP History Help podcast is now history.